Hello. So we'll see how much time I'll get. We're things are not in routine at home, and my partner and me has a date that is long overdue, and we had like a just get out of the house for an hour kind of thing, and it didn't go super smoothly. Yeah, it's just so overwhelming to be a parent. Like, it's insane. Like, not being a parent in isolation, that's like a very well, it can be like what I mean to say is like combining being a parent, working 100%, meeting all the expectations from society. Those three things, those like three pillars, like there's just not enough. There's not enough time, there's not enough energy. You don't have a personality that like reaches to the expectations you create for yourself. For those kinds of things, like it's not even three pillars, because you also have what you need as a person. There's four things constantly battling. It really sucks. And now we're in, and when you create a routine, everything's fine. Like, you find the optimal balance of making all of these things work. Like, you go to your job, kids are in kindergarten and school, you get home, you have time together to be like a parent. You try, but even then, like, you don't feel like you're actually have your head over water, but it's like it's what you have. But then things like this fucking throat infection going on for 3 weeks, it's like everything tips over. And then you wish like or you start thinking like, what the fuck are we doing? Why are we barely why are things barely like working? Not like from an emotional standpoint or like capability standpoint, anything like that. It's just the way things are. Both of us has to work 100%, wants to work, like we have ambitions, we have the need for an identity, applying our skills. Of course we do. We want security, like that we know that we'll manage on our own. Like, everybody needs that. But then you combine that with parenting and everything else, it's just, and it doesn't feel like anyone really manages. Like, everybody's just surviving, which is horrible to say, like, because we should feel incredibly lucky, and we are, but you still feel like you're in survival mode when these kinds of things happen. Especially when these kinds of things, like if you have a bad day in your routine as well, you feel like you're just surviving. But yeah. Yeah, and the thing that gets us through all of this is having our dates, like having 5 hours together on a Sunday, getting some beers in us, just mellow out and just take a like bird's eye view on all this like chaos, and like giving the finger to all the expectations and kind of just team up against the world, those 5 hours. But now we haven't been able to do this because of things being like overly overwhelming. And I don't understand how people stay together as parents with all these expectations and demands without having that kind of thing. For us, it's like going out early on a Sunday, go day drinking. That's how we get through it. We really needed that today. But we didn't get it because, yeah, the youngest being. Oh, well, let's distract ourselves. Sorry about that. I don't know. I have to dump my head or dump my thoughts before I can focus on anything. So let's do. Are we running this? No. npm. Oh, git pull. Oh, yeah. Git pull npm run docs dev 5176. So I played around with it some more. The thing that's scaring me now is that I'm creating these primitives, but at the same time, I think they're needed if you're really gonna make this work. Because one thing is just state, right? But state isn't like having properties, like everything transparent here. You don't think about count being observable, the getter being a computed. You don't care about the increase being like an actual like action abstraction. You don't think about that, which is the great thing about this. But then if you want to do something async like a query, you have to have a primitive for that. Because even though it's basically just a promise, that promise only works in the object-oriented world. It doesn't work in the UI world. So you need a primitive to be able to properly consume it. Yeah, it's almost like... Yeah, anyways, you need that. And the same for mutation as well. If you want to actually track the state of a mutation, you need a mutation primitive. Because it's a promise, and you can't track promises like using just JavaScript. In React, you have to have some primitive around it. But then you have things like, what if you just want to load something once? Like, it's not a query. It's just, you just have a promise for something. And so you need like, so async would be just it's kind of like any kind of promise that also needs to be consumed by the UI. There's no refetch or abort controllers or anything like that. It's just a promise. And then we have this other thing, which is much deeper, which is who should be driving the UI? Is it the state layer or is it the UI itself? And the tricky thing about React is that you can't, unlike Solid, for example, you can't like create state as you render. Like, it needs to be pure. The whole render phase needs to be completely pure. So if you create like state as you render, that's not pure. Like, what I mean is, like, if you do use state, that is kind of pure. Like, it doesn't have side effects. That's what I mean. Like, the render phase has to be side effect free. And if you were to try to instantiate a class, for example, and that class has a side effect, you will get into trouble in React. Unlike unlike Solid, where you actually have proper life cycle. You create it and you have an on cleanup that cleans it up. So you control side effects that way. But you can't really do that in React because of concurrent mode. So that's one problem. And the other problem is that there is no like instantiation phase of a component in React. You just have the render phase. So the first render and the fifth render, it's the same thing. Like it's the same mechanism. So how do you kind of make that work? So this is what Ensure is exploring, is basically you're creating these domains for state. And then, for example, you have a dashboard. And instead of like instantiating the dashboard state immediately, you put Ensure around it. And that means that in the component that actually wants the dashboard state, you just call Ensure dashboard. And that's when it's created. And dashboard can be reconciled as many times as you want. It's going to be the same instance. It kind of auto creates the state. So this is important in, for example, if you have routes and you only want to initialize the dashboard state if you actually go to the dashboard, or maybe your solution actually wants the dashboard to always be there regardless of the route, then you wouldn't use Ensure, right? But there are many scenarios where you want to create state as part of the UI. And I think that's a strong decoupling as well, because the alternative to this is like, if you wanted to only load the dashboard state when you're on the dashboard route, and you have your routing in the UI, because that's a UI thing, right? It's related to displaying the app. And if you wanted to do that there, you will have to, like in some routing hook, like preparation hook, you would have to go in and create the state. So it's not related to rendering the dashboard component. It's related to hitting the route, which happens once, right? There's no reconciliation there. You go in, you create the state, and then you somehow expose it to the dashboard component, where you probably would have to like have a maybe dashboard, like you would have to use the question mark, the option, which means that the typing is off, and so on and so on. So I think it makes a lot of sense to make the state layer not dictate the life cycle of state, if that makes sense. The UI should dictate the life cycle of state. So that maybe you have two different apps. Maybe you have the state layer representing your app, but you might have a mobile app, you might have a desktop app. The mobile app might use different state than the mobile app, but they use the same logic, right? That's the point. Yeah, so I think the thing I wanted to talk about was there's like these three layers. You have the env layer. Env. So env is like, these are classes, object-oriented. Object-oriented. It doesn't have like no reactivity. Interface for the environment needs. So that means that you will kind of pass the env into your state, right? State. So this will be any interaction with the browser, any interaction with some external storage, authentication. It doesn't matter. Everything that's related to the actual environment, that's where you do that stuff. Reactivity interface for UI needs. So your state layer is your application logic. It's also object oriented. It gets the environment. It implements state management, which is reactive. And the goal is to create an interface that the UI needs, right? And then you pass that into your UI. UI. And this is functional. And elements and styling. Observers. What should we call this? Observables. Yeah. So in your end, there's no reactivity at all. It's just classes. Try to design the best possible interface that doesn't expose native APIs, as I said, like the browser or something like Firebase, for example. And then you have state, which is also object-oriented, creates these observables. And its goal is to create an interface for UI needs. And then you have the actual UI, which is functional, uses observers, and it's about elements and styling. Yeah, that's how I think about it. And this ensure thing is related to interface for UI needs. So all of this, like query, mutation, async, ensure, this is to provide an interface for the UI. So the UI at the end of the day, like, is your app. This is where you that's where you follow, like, if you, so this is the thing about developers. When we're building these UIs, we dive into the components first, and that's how we understand how the app actually works. So what can happen is that if your state is the source of truth for how the application actually works in terms of UI, meaning that, okay, so after I've signed in, we're going to load this state, because that state is going to trigger a component to show this other UI. When you do that kind of thing, it means that you have to read your state to understand the UI. And I don't think that is necessarily the most intuitive thing. What you rather want is, like, you want state management for your authentication, you want state management for your app, you want state management for feature A, feature B, and so on. But you don't want your state management logic to transition you into different UI. You want the UI itself to be the logic that shows you how it transitions into these different UIs or experiences. So as an example, did we have an example? Yeah, I guess that was the example. Yeah, I'm still reflecting on this. I'm not perfectly sure. But we'll see. We'll see. But I did publish a new version. Where are we? This is ReactX. Where's the UI lib? Let's close this. I'm not going to do anything more with that. Picture called ReactX. There we go. Divergent Todos. So I did, let's see, pm install ReactX. Wait a minute, sorry. pm install ReactX alpha. So we were playing around with state machines, and what I realized is that the reason state machines becomes very complex in an object-oriented world is because of, well, there are two things really. It depends on how protected you want your logic to be. So if you really want sign-in to only be available in an unauthenticated state, you would have to do something like this. So you have like these explicit classes representing a set of properties and methods available in that specific state. But it gets like, it gets really horrible. Because you can't just express this as like, okay, I'm unauthenticated, authenticating, or whatever. And then you rather put, do I have this here? Yeah, exactly. So this is the actual state, right? And then, which one is this? Yeah, this is the actual state. And then you have like sign in anonymously, sign in test user. So you can always call them regardless of the state you're in, even though they don't really apply. Like it doesn't make sense to sign in if you're already authenticated, for example. So there's a question, do you actually want to protect that? And I've always been chasing like, isn't there some abstraction that just does this? And state machines do, except that they only protect, they don't make it intuitive, in the sense that with a state machine, you will kind of dispatch requests into the machine. So if you try to sign in when you're authenticated, for example, nothing would happen. So you would still be able to do it. But what I'm doing here is that I'm saying only in, where is it? Only in when this class instance is active, you're actually able to sign in. And as soon as you do that, that instance is going to be replaced by authenticating, where you can't do anything. But then again, you could still technically have a reference to this instance, and you could call like sign in again. So it's not like 100% in that sense. Something that would be more protective is like in sign in, you would actually check if this dot state is authenticating. You would like you would set the actual, but then the question is, do you throw an error if you do that? You probably should. So that is somewhat better, because then when you consume this authentication instance, you can call sign in multiple times, but it would only work if you're actually in a state. So you kind of manually protect it. Anyways, my conclusion to this is that I think it's better to just have let's see, because we were in the middle of doing something. What was that thing? Yeah, we were setting up everything for the, oh yeah, that's true, for the profile. So our environment has like the actual authentication mechanism with Firebase, but our authentication state is the thing that manages actually providing reactive state to the UI. It loads up the profile when you're actually authenticated, all of this stuff. Tracks if you previously signed in, and all this good stuff. So yeah, the thing I was reflecting on is that I didn't want to write like state authentication dot state is authenticating. That's the thing I got hung up on. Like, it makes more sense to say is authenticating. But there is no good way to do that with a class, which is kind of annoying. Like, you can somewhat do it, because one trick I learned is, I can show you the trick at least. Let's just, I'm not gonna actually code and get any further here. I'm just gonna, what was this? Authenticating. So we're gonna split these into different types. So that would be unauthenticated. Type authenticated. And then, yeah, it's the error state. Let's see. Type error. Okay, so we have these states now, and what we can do is we can actually put them on here. I'm gonna show you. Like so, but we also have to type them. So they can be string or null. This is a Boolean. This is profile or null. And this is user or null, right? The problem is that you can't express this as a union by just instantiating the class. So if I instantiate authentication state now, it won't have this union. So if I look at is authenticating, it won't show that user is null, for example. But user will always be null if I'm authenticating. Another, yeah. And then, but what you can do, which is very interesting, which I found during these explorations, is if you do static create, you can return new authentication state. What does it need? It needs the env. And you can, as authentication, I think. Yeah, sorry. And then, yeah, sorry. As authentication and authenticated or unauthenticated or what was it? Error or authenticating. So you can do this. So if I now do const test new, let's see, authentication state create as any. If I do if test, so we can compare them. Const test2 new authentication state as any. So if test2 is authenticating, test2, why doesn't it show anything? Yeah, it shows user or null, right? But if I now do test2, sorry, test is authenticating. You see that? It shows the user as null. So you can actually make this work. I didn't know that. The only problem is that you won't get this information. when you apply the state inside of the class. First of all, I apply the values individually. I don't set like an object. Well, I guess the way you could do this is like you can say object.assign this, and then you could like as authenticated, like, but it's so convoluted, right? It's really annoying. I wish there was a better way to do this. I really wish there was a better way to do this. And you might say like, why the fuck care about this stuff? It's just because you want your code to reflect what it actually does. Like if I have all these 4 properties and they don't have a relationship when I consume them, like I'm going to be overriding types and get into potential bugs and everything. So I just wish there was some kind of I feel like there's this trick I still haven't figured out or something. Couldn't you do like I thought you could say implements with a type. Could you do that? Type what? Implements. No, you can't do that. It needs to be an interface, right? Of object types with statically known members. Yeah, I don't think this works. Yeah, it really sucks that you can't do this. But I also feel like there's something I haven't tried yet. But just the fact that you kind of have to do this, like double typing and everything, it just, then I think it makes more sense to have individual classes. Yeah, I wonder how this would look like. Yeah, that's another thing I'm curious about. I wonder how this looks like when, if I do is authenticating true. I don't think this actually works. And let's do it simple. Authenticating true. Oh, sorry, false, true. Authenticated. False, and you would have a user, which would be, let's just say true. Then you would have authentication class. Can't you extend like unauthenticated authenticating? Does that work? No, that doesn't work. Oh, it can only. Oh, what? Oh, I think it was implements could be. Can you do implements and authenticated? Can you do that? Oh, what happened there? Authenticating and authenticated. How does this work? Would this work? Or no? User. What's wrong here? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no, that wouldn't work either. Yeah, it really sucks. It really sucks. Because if I did authenticating, then it would be correct, right? Yeah. Ah, I wish that would work. That would have been amazing. Like, is it possible to do like an interface? Let's just go through everything here. It's just fun. Interface. Yeah, so this wouldn't work. But what if I did auth equals unauthenticated or authenticating or authenticated? And then I say that it implements auth. No. Yeah. Yeah, it really sucks. It super sucks. Super sucks. It super sucks. Yeah, and even here, it doesn't make sense to have classes. Well, I guess you will kind of do constructor to get the user, and the same for error. You would like pass in the error, so that will be fine, but yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, this bothers the hell out of me that we don't have a good way to express this. Yeah, I have to go. Yeah. I need to solve this. I need to find a way that makes sense to me. that I can relax and lean back into. Even I don't write like unions like this that often, but when you, so for example, the query and the async and all of that just works because it has because I'm doing that trick under the hood, because we are using like query, like we're not saying new query. So when we're using query under the hood, it's creating a new query. It's a class instance, but I'm applying that union as union. So it works. But when you write your own custom class, you don't really have that opportunity. So yeah, I wish but I wish you didn't have to do any tricks for this. But I feel like there's something I'm missing here as well. It's like, what if authentication, what if this was like more of an event emitter? So when you did new authentication, you would listen to on state change. So yeah, it was like an event emitter. So you would have like test machine, and that would be private, right? And then you had your actual, let's put this in a class, app. So you would have private test machine or something like that. And then you would have a public auth machine. Just like you have an event emitter and an actual event, you would have auth. And then internally, you would listen to equals this.auth machine dot state, right? Instead of auth emitter dot event, you would do state, right? Instead of subscribing to that emitter, you would just look at its state. The thing is that something needs to change that state. Well, I think yeah. But the problem here is like I wanted the sign in to be on unauthenticated. And then how does it emit up that? Yeah, no, I have to think about this, but I have to go. Bye.